Dear first grade students at the Faculty of Commerce at Banha University in both Banha campus and Abur campus, welcome to the recorded lecture series for the module entitled Economics of Natural Resources and Environment. Recorded lectures are used in conjunction with face-to-face interactive lectures in the hybrid educational system at our university. The lecture is divided to two equal halves. One half is delivered on campus, whereas the other half is delivered via a recorded lecture. Recorded lectures are to be used in conjunction with your course textbooks. The current course is designed to be accessible to students who have not completed any introductory course in economics. The main source of the current presentation is Chapter 20 of Harris and Roach, 2018. The title of the chapter is Water, Economics and Policy. We started discussing this chapter in the previous lecture, so let's continue discussing the rest of the issues highlighted in this chapter. Points to be analyzed during the current lecture are addressing water shortages, which will be addressed through discussing how to increase water supply and how to manage the water demand. Moreover, we will discuss other relating issues that include the water pricing, water privatization, and water as a common property resource. By the end of the current lecture, the student should be able to identify some strategies for increasing freshwater supply and other strategies for freshwater demand management. Other learning outcomes include the ability to recognize the effects of different block pricing structures for freshwater. In addition, you will be able to explain why freshwater privatization is a controversial issue. Moreover, students will be able to identify some strategies for environmental restoration in water management. There are three ways to increase freshwater supply. These ways are to extract groundwater from aquifers and to construct dams. Moreover, desalination represents another way for increasing freshwater supply. Let's discuss these ways in the next slides. Regarding the first way of increasing freshwater supply, which is extracting groundwater from aquifers, we could say that this way has led to groundwater overdraft in major water-scarce areas throughout the world. Countries such as Saudi Arabia and Libya rely on fossil groundwater from ancient aquifers in desert areas. However, these aquifers now have practically no recharge, and thus they are likely to be depleted in the next 40 to 60 years. Similar problems affect aquifers in North China and in India. It is worth mentioning that nearly 1/4 of the world's population lives in areas where groundwater is being withdrawn faster than it can be replenished. This includes many of the world's major agricultural regions, including the Central Valley in California and the Nile Delta in Egypt. Construction of dams can also increase available supply of fresh water. Dams can capture seasonal floodwater that would otherwise be unavailable for human use. Moreover, dams provide hydroelectric power and irrigation. Globally, there are about 48,000 large dams are in operation. About half of them are in China. These dams provide 19% of the world's electricity. Most major dam sites are already being exploited. More dams are still being built, mainly in China, Iran, Japan, and Turkey. However, new dam construction often involves major environmental and social costs. The world's large dams have wiped out species, flooded huge areas of wetland, forest, and farmland, and displaced many millions of people. Dams reduce biodiversity, decrease fish populations, and lower crop production. Desalination is the third way of increasing freshwater supply. It could be defined as the removal of salt from ocean and seawater to make it usable for irrigation, industrial, or other water supplies. Thus, desalination has appeal as a potential source of virtually unlimited supply. However, cost is a significant barrier to desalination. Removing salt from seawater requires large amounts of energy. Desalination costs have declined as technology has improved. Nonetheless, it is more expensive compared with obtaining water supplies from surface water or groundwater. Desalination is likely to make economic sense in some very dry regions. However, it is unlikely to supply a significant amount of the planet's water in the future. Now, let's identify ways of freshwater demand management in agricultural and non-agricultural uses. Increasing the efficiency of water use can alter the projected trend of increasing freshwater demand. The greatest efficiency gains can be achieved in agriculture because traditional irrigation methods by flooding or channeling water by gravity is not efficient. This is because around 60% of the water is lost by evaporation or infiltration. Moreover, new technologies of micro-irrigation by drip systems allow an efficiency of 95%. Also, technologies of monitoring soil and weather conditions can more accurately determine appropriate irrigation needs. For non-agricultural uses, recycling and reuse of wastewater can reduce water demand. For example, through a grey water system, water used for some purposes such as laundry and bathing can be used to irrigate landscaping. Water use standards for devices such as dishwashers, toilets, and showerheads can reduce domestic water needs. Moreover, leak detection and repair, especially in municipal water supply lines, can also help reduce water consumption. Conservation is generally the cheapest way to address water shortage. Water conservation can be realized through several approaches. These approaches include price-based and non-price approaches. Let's start with discussing non-price approaches, which can be classified into four basic categories. The first category is voluntary adoption of water conserving technologies. The second category is mandatory water use restrictions. The third one is education and information. Finally, the fourth category is innovative institutional design of common property resources. This last category will be discussed later during the current lecture. Regarding the first category of non-price approaches, that is voluntary adoption of water conserving technologies, it includes setting standards for device efficiency or offering water customers discounts or even free items such as low-flow showerheads. Concerning mandatory restrictions on water use, these restrictions are often implemented in response to drought conditions. They are likely to include restrictions on watering lawns, washing cars, or filling swimming pools. Education and information could be employed to conserve water. For example, information about ways to reduce water consumption could be sent via email to consumers. Moreover, talks to public on water conservation may be offered through TV or the internet. Non-price methods are all useful to control demand. However, economists tend to focus on water pricing as the most effective way to induce water conservation. Prices should serve as indicators of economic scarcity. They should reflect physical limits and environmental externalities. However, governments have maintained low water prices, particularly for agriculture. This is of course for various social and political reasons. Let's discuss water pricing in the next slides. Water pricing could be defined as setting the price of water to influence the quantity consumed of water. The relevant question might be how prices of water are determined. Well, of course, determining water prices must consider production costs. But which costs should be considered when pricing water? In this regard, we must differentiate between the average total cost of supplying water and its marginal cost. The marginal cost is the cost of supplying one additional unit of water, whereas the average total cost is simply the total supply cost divided by the number of the units supplied. Another important question might be, why is this distinction important? Let's discuss this point in the next slides. Now, we will answer why it's important to differentiate between marginal cost and average total cost. Let me bring to your attention that a profit-maximizing firms will produce as long as marginal revenues exceeds marginal supply costs. In other words, such a firm will produce as long as each produced unit is profitable. The distinction between marginal cost and total average cost is important because water utilities are normally regulated monopolies. So let me differentiate between regulated monopolies and unregulated monopolies. An unregulated monopolists can set their prices to maximize profits, but a regulated monopolist, such as a water utility, is regulated by an external entity, for example, through controls on price. In the United States of America, water utilities are either privately or publicly owned. For both, regulatory bodies normally set water prices using average cost pricing strategy without any consideration of marginal costs. Private water utilities are permitted to make a reasonable profit by allowing them to charge a price somewhat above the average total cost. For publicly owned firms, prices are set to just cover their total supply cost, considering both fixed and variable costs. In other words, price is set to equal to average total cost, implying that firms will just break even. Both private and public water utilities use the average cost pricing strategy. This strategy is a water pricing strategy in which price is set equal to the average total cost of production or equal to the average total cost of production plus a profit markup if the water utility is a for-profit entity. A relevant question is, does average cost pricing result in an efficient level of water supply? The socially efficient level of provision for a good occurs when marginal benefits equal marginal costs. Normally, the marginal cost of water supply is quite lower than its average total cost. This is not a surprise because supplying water requires significant upfront capital costs, such as for pipes and treatment facilities. This might seem to imply that the efficient price for water should be lower than its average cost. But we also need to consider the externality costs of supplying water. These negative externalities may include impacts at the loss of wetlands and wildlife habitat. For a socially efficient price, any negative externality should be taken into consideration when calculating the average cost of supply. In this regard, failing to account for water's externality costs implies that average cost pricing may result in a price that is too low. Thus, we could say that it is not clear whether average cost pricing results in a price that is too high or too low from the perspective of economic efficiency. Does water have a single price? Actually, the price of water varies in several aspects. First, the price of water depends on its use. In other words, different users are charged different rates. Second, the price of water can vary regionally. Third, water commonly is not sold at a constant price per unit. Let's discuss these points in the next slides. The water price normally depends on its use. This means that different users are charged different rates. More precisely, domestic uses of water are charged at higher rates compared to agricultural and industrial uses. It may initially seem inefficient and perhaps unfair. However, there is some justification for charging agriculture and industrial users less than households. Household water requires a high degree of treatment because it must meet drinking water standards. In contrast, irrigation water is not required to meet the same quality standards and thus is cheaper to supply. After use, domestic water must also be removed for treatment. In many cities, households are charged a separate sewer rate for water disposal in addition to charge for their water supply. As mentioned earlier, the price of water can vary regionally. For example, the average monthly water bill in different American cities vary in relation to many factors, including the average precipitation, whether these cities are near to the Great Lakes, whether they have access to sufficient groundwater, and the presence of reservoirs. It is logical to expect that water prices would be highest where water is the scarcest. However, very dry regions such as Las Vegas charge very low rates. This reflects the kind of government subsidy for water. Other factors can determine water availability besides precipitation. Water is relatively cheap near the Great Lakes because they provide a low-cost supply of water. Moreover, some cities may have access to sufficient groundwater while others may not. Some cities can store water in reservoirs to keep supplies relatively constant throughout the year. Another complication in pricing water is that water commonly is not sold at a constant price per unit. In some cases, water users simply pay a flat monthly fee, and then they are able to essentially consume all the water they wish to consume with no marginal increase in the cost. In some countries, including Canada and the United Kingdom, water is not normally metered. In other countries, such as the United States and Egypt, water usage is metered. There are three basic pricing structures for metered water as illustrated in Figure 20.10. The first is the uniform rate structure, in which the price per unit of water is constant regardless of the amount of water used. The second is the increasing block structure, in which different water prices are charged according to different blocks. The price is constant within each block, but the price per unit is higher for successive blocks. An increasing block structure encourages more water conservation, as water users will wish to avoid moving into the higher priced blocks. Finally, the third is the decreasing block structure, in which the price per unit of water decreases as the amount of water used increases. The rationale behind a decreasing block structure is that it provides a price break for large water users, typically for commercial or industrial users. Water may also be priced differently by season, with rates normally higher during the summer season to discourage non-essential water consumption. Internationally, rate structures vary widely. An international survey of water utilities found that in OECD countries, 49% used increasing block pricing, 47% used uniform rates, and only 4% used decreasing block rates. In non-OECD countries, 63 of water utilities use uniform pricing, and nearly all other used increasing block pricing. As mentioned earlier during the current lecture, to overcome water shortage, water demand management via price-based and non-price approaches can be adopted. We have considered non-price approaches earlier during the current lecture. So let's consider the price approach. In other words, we are going to discuss how to manage demand by raising prices of water. By raising prices, utilities send consumers a signal about the increasing scarcity of water. Higher water prices will induce a behavioral response in households and other water users. For example, irrigators are more likely to invest in efficient irrigation methods. Similarly, households are more likely to purchase low-flow shower heads and wash cars less frequently. But how much will water users reduce their water consumption in response to higher prices? Well, the amount depends on the price elasticity of demand. The elasticity of demand for water tends to be inelastic, meaning that the percentage change in the quantity demanded tends to be smaller in absolute value than the percentage change in price. Water managers need to estimate the price elasticity of demand for water for different users during different seasons in order to determine how to adjust the price to meet conservation objectives. Water demand tends to be less elastic in winter months than in summer ones. In the summer, more water use is for relatively non-essential purposes such as irrigation lawns and washing cars. But in the winter, a higher percentage of total water use is for more essential tasks such as bathing and washing dishes. So in the summer, households can more easily reduce water use in response to a price increase. Thus, a well-designed price structures such as increasing block pricing can also promote conservation. An important issue is whether water should be supplied as a public good by government agencies or as a commodity by private companies. In other words, water privatization is the management of water resources by a private for-profit entity as opposed to a public utility. Water privatization has been promoted by international organizations such as the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. The argument is that private firms can provide more efficient and reliable service than public entities, particularly in developing countries. Theoretically, if a private firm is able to provide water at a lower cost, then these cost savings can be passed on to consumers. Thus, more people are likely to obtain access to water, but without appropriate regulation, a private company may be able to charge excessive rates or fail to address the water needs of low-income households. Water privatization has occurred to some extent in many countries, including China, France, Mexico, and the United States. The experience with water privatization has been mixed. For example, water privatization in Manila in the Philippines has been successful in expanding water supplies to poor households. However, in other cases, water privatization has failed to deliver on its promise. A dramatic example with the experience in Bolivia. The privatization of water resources can also lead to their overexploitation. In many rural communities throughout the world, access rights to groundwater have been sold to soft drink producing companies such as Coca-Cola and Nestle. These multinationals have often exploited the water resources in an unsustainable way in India. Privatization is likely to work best if it is combined with policies that ensuring that the poorest can afford enough water to meet their basic needs. For example, in the South African system that provides a basic supply of water for free with increasing prices for larger quantities. So we could say that privatization remains controversial. A major problem with privatization is that it fails to recognize the nature of water as a common property resource. The World Bank and other international financial institutions are still promoting privatization. However, community opposition has pushed policy in many areas in the opposite direction. The return of previously privatized water supply and sanitation services to domestic authorities is thought to improve access and the quality of water services. Moreover, it can also offer opportunities to build democratic governance, which can be achieved by involving citizens into the collective decision-making process. Furthermore, it pressures local governments to be more responsive to the needs of the poorest of their inhabitants and ensuring a basic right to water. Municipal control is one approach to the management of water as a common property resource. Another approach is the traditional shared management. There is a long history of management of water as a common property resource through shared institutions in many areas around the world. Local collective systems of irrigation that have proved sustainable over centuries are found in many societies around the globe. Some hydrologists have proposed a new paradigm of water management named as Watershed Restoration. This paradigm is based on a small-scale natural water cycle. The paradigm aims to collect rainwater, which is then used to recharge groundwater and through the recreation and protection of wetlands that purify water and return it to the soil. Natural water cycles can be restored. Recreating local wet ecosystems and restoring small-scale water cycles can help combat some of the worst effects of climate change by increasing mist and moisture in the atmosphere, preventing drying and desertification. We can identify the conditions under which cooperative local management of water as a common property resource can be effective. These conditions could be listed as follows. First, most users of a resource should be involved in creating rules for managing the resource. Second, there should be monitors of the resource. They should periodically evaluate conditions. Third, there should be mechanisms to resolve conflicts that are responsive and low cost. Fourth, there should be graduated sanctions for resource users who violate the rules. The next slide displays key concepts and terms which have been introduced during the current lecture. Kindly spend enough time in studying these concepts and terms. This is the end of today's recorded lecture. Thank you.